Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, the connection between confidence and, well, curiosity.
Yeah, it's a great topic. We've got some really interesting material to look at.
Absolutely. And our aim here is to, understand how these two traits work, how they interact, and what that balance actually means for us.
It seems straightforward at first glance. You want both, right?
You'd think so. High confidence, loads of curiosity. But the sources we have suggest it's a bit more complicated. There seems to be a point where too much confidence can, surprisingly, dampen that curiosity.
That's definitely one of the key insights. The material really draws a distinction. Confidence, it's often about, action, assertion, taking risks. It's that feeling of being secure enough to act.
Okay.
Whereas curiosity, that's more about exploration, learning, asking why.
Mm,
It drives empathy, understanding.
the engine of learning, as you said. So let's turn into that relationship then, because one of the things that really jumped out was this idea of an inverted U-shaped connection. That's not intuitive, is it?
Not really, no. What the research seems to show is that curiosity peaks when our confidence is, well, moderate.
Moderate. Why moderate?
Well, think about it. If you feel you know absolutely nothing about a topic, you might feel too lost, too hesitant to even start asking questions. You lack that initial confidence to engage.
Right. You don't even have a starting point, maybe feel a bit overwhelmed.
Exactly. But then, as you learn a little, you gain some confidence, enough to see the edges of what you know and, crucially, what you don't know. That's when curiosity really seems to fire up.
Ah, okay. So that moderate confidence gives you the footing to explore further.
Precisely. But, and this is the other side of that, if your confidence keeps climbing, if you become too sure of what you know,
Then the curiosity starts to drop off.
that's what the evidence suggests. If you're convinced you basically got it all figured out, the motivation to question, to dig deeper, it just isn't really there anymore.
Your own certainty becomes a barrier. Wow.
Yeah. And the sources talk about how this overconfidence can sometimes shade into arrogance, especially, it seems, in settings that are more egalitarian or, low stakes socially.
What do you mean by low stakes?
Well, situations where there isn't a strict hierarchy or immediate consequences for being wrong, in those spots, it's maybe easier to just keep asserting your view instead of trying to understand someone else's.
You prioritize your viewpoint over genuine understanding. It creates a sort of echo chamber.
Kind of. And this connects directly to something the material mentions, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, yes, the classic. Always fascinating and slightly unnerving.
It is. And the link here is quite clear in the sources. Dunning-Kruger, where limited knowledge leads to overestimating your competence.
Yeah.
That overestimation actively discourages curiosity. If you think you're already competent, why would you look for gaps in your knowledge or seek feedback?
So it's not just being wrong, it's that being wrong in that specific way stops you from finding out you're wrong. It prevents the curiosity needed to learn.
Exactly. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop. The lack of knowledge fuels the overconfidence, which in turn suppresses the curiosity needed to gain more knowledge.
Okay, that's a powerful individual dynamic, but the sources also zoom out, looking at the societal side of things. This idea of a cult of confidence came up.
Yes, and that's a really important dimension. Our society, particularly in competitive fields like business or politics, often seems to reward assertiveness, self-promotion, outward displays of confidence.
You see it all the time. The loudest voice often gets the most attention.
Right. And the potential downside, as the sources suggest, is that people who are perhaps more thoughtful, more curious, maybe more humble, might get overlooked. Their valuable insights could be missed simply because they aren't projecting that supreme confidence.
So we end up valuing the performance of certainty, sometimes more than actual competence or understanding. What does that mean for leadership?
Well, it raises big questions. If we prioritize that kind of assertive confidence above all else, we risk ending up with leaders who are maybe more focused on looking decisive, maintaining authority.
Rather than fostering collaboration or being open to new ideas.
Precisely. They might be less inclined to listen, less willing to admit they don't have all the answers, which can stifle innovation and team morale.
Which seems counterintuitive. You'd want a leader who is curious, who wants to learn from their team, who can adapt, someone who balances confidence with that openness.
Exactly. The sources really point towards effective leadership involving balance, the confidence to act, but also the curiosity to stay informed, seek feedback, and value different perspectives. That's what allows for real growth.
Okay, so if overconfidence is a potential pitfall, How do we consciously shift towards valuing and fostering curiosity more? The sources talk about benefits.
They do, and it's quite compelling. Fostering curiosity, the material suggests, leads to more inclusive environments, because if you're genuinely curious about someone else's perspective, you naturally listen more actively, right?
Yeah, you want to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. It also fuels innovation. Asking why or what if is basically the starting point for any new idea.
Hmm.
And fundamentally, it drives learning and makes us more adaptable, which is crucial in, well, pretty much any context today.
It suggests valuing the questions as much as the answers. That's a shift.
It is. Instead of feeling pressure to always know, we embrace the process of finding out.
So how do we cultivate that? The sources mention integrating it more into education,
Yes,
workplace.
actively building it in,
Yeah.
encouraging questions, making it safe to say, I don't know, valuing intellectual humility, seeing the admission of not knowing not as a weakness, but as a starting point for growth.
Right. It's not about eliminating confidence, though. The sources revisit that line between confidence and arrogance.
Yeah, it's about the type of confidence. Confidence grounded in self-awareness and realistic assessment, maybe even humility that's constructive. It empowers you, but keeps you open.
Okay.
Arrogance, though, often comes from a place of insecurity, according to the material. It's defensive. It dismisses others to protect a fragile ego.
That distinction makes sense. One feels like strength, the other like a shield. And the sources also mentioned curiosity isn't just personal, it has a social aspect.
That's a really neat point. Some research cited suggests curiosity can be contagious.
Really? How so?
Well, when you model genuine curiosity, asking questions, showing interest, it can apparently encourage others around you to do the same. It helps create a more inquisitive, open atmosphere.
Like giving permission for others to be curious, too.
Kind of. And of course, it reinforces the idea that curiosity boosts learning. Being genuinely interested makes you want to find out more, making the whole learning process feel less like work.
Now, another layer the sources brought in was culture. Does that play a role in how confidence and curiosity are viewed?
It definitely seems to. It adds complexity. The sources note, for example, that more individualistic cultures, like many in the West, often really champion confidence, seeing it as key to personal success.
Right, the self-made individual narrative.
Exactly. Whereas in more collectivist cultures, there might be a greater value placed on humility, on group harmony. In those contexts, very strong displays of individual confidence might be seen less positively than a more reserved, perhaps more inquisitive approach that considers the group.
So what reads as confident in one place might seem arrogant or inappropriate elsewhere. That's important context.
Very important. It reminds us there isn't one single right way to be.
And bringing that back to leadership again, that balance seems even more critical across different cultures.
Absolutely. While the expression might vary, that underlying need for leaders to balance conviction with openness seems pretty universal for effectiveness. Leaders showing humility, showing they're willing to learn, tend to build more trust and foster innovation. Overconfident leaders risk shutting down valuable input.
Okay, this is all great context, but let's get practical. How can people listening actually cultivate more curiosity day to day? The sources had some concrete strategies.
They did, and they're quite accessible. One big one is simply asking more open-ended questions.
Instead of yes, no questions.
Exactly. Questions that start with why, how, what if. Things like, why do you think that happened? Or how did you come to see it that way? They invite deeper explanation, not just confirmation.
That forces a more thoughtful response, both from the other person and maybe from yourself as you listen.
Definitely. Another approach mentioned is adopting a learner mindset, sometimes called the clumsy student approach.
Clumsy student.
Yeah, basically giving yourself permission to be new at something, to focus on the process of learning rather than immediately needing to be good at it. It lowers the stakes and encourages exploration.
I like that. Takes the pressure off performing.
Yeah,
Makes it okay to not know.
precisely.
Yeah.
Reflective practices were also highlighted, things like journaling, maybe meditation, or just quiet thinking time. They help you become more aware of your own assumptions, your biases, areas where you might be resistant to new ideas.
So understanding yourself better to open up curiosity.
Exactly. And crucially, seeking out diverse perspectives, actively engaging with people who think differently, who come from different backgrounds. It's one of the most powerful ways to challenge your own views and spark new questions.
Stepping outside the bubble.
Right. And finally, creating environments where questions are genuinely welcomed, whether it's at work, at home, wherever, making it safe and normal to ask, to explore, to not have the answer immediately.
Fostering that culture of inquiry. Makes sense. So we have these tools, but when do we lean more on confidence and when more on curiosity? The sources gave some guidance there too, right?
Yes, it's about adaptability. It's not always one or the other. Confidence, the sources suggest, is often needed in high-stakes moments. Making a tough decision, leading a team through uncertainty, advocating for yourself or your ideas, that requires conviction.
Okay, when action and decisiveness are key.
Right. But curiosity tends to be more valuable in collaborative settings. Brainstorming, problem solving together, learning something new, seeking constructive feedback. That's when openness and inquiry really shine.
So it's about reading the room, reading the situation, knowing when to assert and when to explore.
Exactly. Developing that discernment helps you navigate situations more effectively, build better relationships, and ultimately foster more growth for yourself and those around you.
This has been really, really illuminating. I think the big takeaway for me is definitely moving past just thinking, more confidence is always good. It's about that balance and really understanding the power, the necessity of curiosity, not just for us as individuals, but for how we function together.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening, drawing from this material. Think about a recent situation. Was there a moment where maybe you leaned too hard on confidence and perhaps missed a chance to learn or understand better? Or, conversely, a time where maybe a lack of confidence held back your curiosity? Just reflect on how consciously thinking about this balance, knowing when to be sure-footed and when to ask why, could change how things play out next time. Something to mull over.